April 18, 1945. Philippine Sea, 240 miles east of Okinawa. A lone Zero sliced through the low. Morning clouds like a wounded falcon. Smoke trailing from its cowling one. Wings shuddering under the stress of every gust. Inside the cramped cockpit, Ensign Tadayoshi Koga, just 20 years old, tasted blood on his tongue and salt in the air. The engine coughed once, twice, each sputter echoing his own heartbeat. He didn't know it yet, but in less than, for minutes, he would touch down on the deck of an American aircraft carrier, alive, and not a single man on that ship would fire because no one, not even Koga himself, could believe what they were seeing. The hook was already written in the sky. A Japanese pilot fleeing for his life, a U.S. carrier crew preparing for a kamikaze attack, and a landing so impossible it became legend. But right now, Koga was focused on one thing, keeping his dying Zero in the air, long enough to find somewhere, anywhere, to put it down. His mission had begun 3 hours earlier, from an airfield on Formosa, a routine patrol over the approaches to Okinawa. But nothing had been routine since. America had begun its relentless march through the Pacific. Every patrol felt like a coin toss. This morning, the coin came up American. The Hellcat struck from above, diving. Out of the sun, Koga's wingman vanished. In the first pass, one flash of fire, one falling blossom of smoke. Cog jerked. His stick felt bullets tear through his fuselage, heard his engine scream in protest. He dove into a cloud front, shook his pursuers, and immediately realized the worst. He had lost his bearings. Fuel draining, engine failing. Radio dead, island nowhere in sight. The Zero shuddered again. Koga looked down. The oil pressure needle was falling hard. He scanned the horizon, hoping for a strip of land, and instead saw something else. Something huge. A shape on the ocean. Steel flat, wide. A ship. No, a monster of a ship. An aircraft carrier. His breath hitched. For a moment, he prayed it was Japanese, but a second glance killed the hope. The flight deck was edged in white. The aircraft parked on deck with the wrong shape. Bulky, rugged, unmistakably American, a U.S. Navy carrier group right. Below him, Cog's stomach twisted. If he turned away now, he would crash into the sea within minutes. If he stayed, they would shoot him out of the sky. It was no choice at all, just that cruel. Wartime math every pilot eventually learned. He banked gently, lining up with the carrier's deck. On the flight deck of a USS Bogue, the air crews were preparing for recovery operations when a lookout shouted from the island, "Incoming aircraft, Zero, low, damaged." Alarms erupted. Sailors froze in place. Gunners swung their barrels around. But then they noticed something strange. The Zero wasn't diving. It wasn't accelerating. It wasn't even armed. Its landing gear were down. It was trying to land. A murmur rippled across the deck as officers sprinted into position. Commander Harold Dixon, the air operations chief, stared through binoculars, baffled. What in God's name? A kamikaze would never lower his landing gear. A fighter trying to strafe them wouldn't be coming in this slow. And a reconnaissance plane would never approach a carrier like this. Everything screamed wrong. Hold fire. Dixon barked. Hold fire. Koga didn't know the order had saved him. He only saw the deck rising to meet him. The carrier's LSO landing signal. Officer stood frozen, paddles in hand. What was he supposed to do? Guide a Zero onto the deck like it was an American plane? The Japanese fighter descended through the sheer of turbulent wind gusts rising off the carrier's bow. Cog clenched the stick, eyes locked on the deck. 50 feet, 30, 20. The Zero wobbled. Smoke spat from the cowling. The arresting wires glinted below. Koga exhaled, easing back on the throttle, and the engine died. Just quit. The nose dipped. The deck rushed upward. Sailors flinched. The LSO dove aside. Someone shouted, "Brace." The Zero slammed onto the wooden deck with a heavy metallic crack, bouncing, once, skidding sideways, wheels screaming, tailhook scraping across. 3 wires before catching the 4th, and jerking the aircraft violently to A. Stop. Silence for a heartbeat. No one moved. Ensign Tadayoshi Koga sat trembling in the cockpit, stunned that he was still alive. The sailors on deck stared back at him, jaws hanging open, trying to make sense of the impossible. A Japanese pilot had just landed on an American aircraft carrier. Koga slowly raised his hands. The nearest sailors lifted their rifles. No shots fired, no shouting, just a surreal, breathless moment where 2 enemies blinked at each other in disbelief. Commander Dixon stepped forward and uttered the words later retold in a dozen war memoirs. "Secure the pilot. He's ours." Koga swallowed hard. He had no idea what awaited him, but his war, at least, in the air was over. The deck crew approached slowly, cautiously, weapons raised, but fingers off the triggers. No, one wanted to be the first to take a step too far, too fast. After all, no American had ever captured a Japanese pilot like this. Not from the sky, not from an aircraft still warm, from flight, and certainly not from the deck of a carrier he'd nearly crashed into. Koga's cockpit canopy creaked as he pushed it open. His hands were still raised, trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. He was a small man, barely 5 feet 4 inches, with oil streaked across his cheek and a cut bleeding above his eyebrow. The wind whipped across the deck, drying the sweat on his face. A young sailor, probably no older than him, stared at Koga with wide, almost confused eyes. Jesus, he's just a kid. Koga understood the word kid. He had learned fragments of English in school, but he kept his gaze forward. He had been trained never to surrender, to resist to the last breath, to take his own life rather than fall into enemy hands. But he also knew the truth. If he tried anything now, he would be dead within seconds. Commander Dixon walked up, his boots thumping against the wooden deck. He studied the young pilot for several long seconds, then spoke in a calm but firm tone. "You're going to be treated fairly. Don't make any sudden moves." "Understood." Koga hesitated, then nodded. 2 sailors moved in, gently pulling him from the cockpit. His legs buckled the moment his boots touched the deck. He hadn't realized how weak he was, and the sailors caught him instinctively. That moment, brief as it was, humanized everything an enemy pilot once feared. In the air was just a wounded, dehydrated, terrified man standing among the very people he had been trained to kill. The crew led him across the deck toward the island, and Koga's eyes darted around. He studied the Grumman Wildcats and Avenger bombers parked in neat patterns. He saw crewmen in white vests, dragging hoses, rolling wheel chocks, guiding aircraft with practiced movements. He couldn't help himself. He was amazed. This wasn't like the chaotic, undersupplied Japanese airfields he knew. This was a floating city, efficient, clean, lethally organized. No wonder America never ran out of planes. As Koga was escorted below deck, the flight crews gathered around the Zero. Some touched the skin of the aircraft, surprised at how thin it was, more like soda can metal than armor. Others peered into the cockpit. Look at this. No armor, plating, and the fuel lines there, right there. Everything's so damn light. No wonder they turned so well. One mechanic whistled. This thing's a death trap with wings. But to the U.S. Navy and its intelligence officers, the Zero was not a death trap. It was a treasure, a fully intact combat, flown A-6M0, the aircraft American pilots had feared since Pearl Harbor, the fighter that had dominated the skies early in the war. Now it sat quietly on their deck, captured without a single bullet fired. The intelligence officers descended on it almost immediately. Below deck, Koga was taken to a small compartment. 2 MPs stood outside. He sat on a metal bench, hands clasped tightly. He fully expected to be beaten or interrogated. Brutally, Japan drilled into its pilots that Americans were barbarians, but instead a medic entered. Hold still. The medic said gently, dabbing the cut on Koga's brow with antiseptic. Kerr flinched at the sting, but the medic didn't raise his voice or strike. He simply continued working with calm professionalism. When he finished, he handed Koga a small cup of water. Koga stared at it suspiciously. The medic nodded. Go ahead. Koga drank. It was cold, clean, better than any water he had tasted in months. The medic gave a small smile. You'll be all right. And then he left. Koga exhaled shakily. His entire life, every speech, every pamphlet, every officer had told him Americans were monsters. Yet the first American he met had treated him like a human being. The contradiction rattled him more than the crash landing itself. Word of the Zer's capture spread through the carrier group like wildfire. A dozen officers crowded around the aircraft within minutes. Camera crews appeared clicking photos. Chief engineer Addison practically climbed under the fuselage to inspect the engine mounts. Look at the weight savings, he muttered. Everything is minimal. They sacrifice protection for maneuverability. Commander Dixon stood beside him. Can we put her back in the air? Addison grinned. Oh, we're damn sure. Go to try. Meanwhile, Captain Giles, the ship's commanding officer, exchanged glances with his air intelligence officer. This goes straight to Washington. Giles said, we need a transport arranged the moment we return to port. A captured Zero meant simulations, testing tactics, and a massive shift in air combat strategy. It was the kind of discovery that could save hundreds, maybe thousands of American lives. All because one young Japanese pilot had miscalculated his heading and trusted the wrong patch of ocean in his compartment. Koga could feel the vibrations of the deck as aircraft launched and landed. He imagined the Zero being examined, poked, prodded, studied. He wondered what his commanders would think of him now, whether his family would ever know he survived, or if Japan would simply declare him dead, disgraced. He bowed his head. He had failed his mission, failed his homeland, and now his aircraft, the pride of Japan, was in enemy hands. The weight of that shame was suffocating, but he was still alive. And in war, survival was its own kind of defiance. Up on deck, Commander Dixon stood beside the Zero and shook his head in disbelief. Gentlemen, he said quietly, this may be the most valuable landing of the entire war. The deck crew nodded. No one argued. Night settled over the USS Bogue like a heavy blanket. The sea calm and black beneath the carrier's hull. Below deck, Ensign Tadayoshi Koga sat on the edge of his bunk, fingers interlocked so tightly. They acted. He still felt the vibration of the flight deck above him, the thrum of engines, the shifting weight of a war machine he was never meant to stand. Inside, captured, alive, dishonored, the words looped endlessly in his mind. His compartment door opened with a metallic click. 2 Marines stepped in. Not harsh, not aggressive, just beautiful. Pilot, one said, You're needed. Topside. Koga stood. His legs were stiff, his shoulders heavy. He expected interrogation, maybe punishment, but the Marines guided him through the narrow corridors with the same calm. Professionalism as before. The carrier was alive around him, voices shouting. Orders, machinery humming, sailors jogging with purpose. It was nothing like the crumbling fuel. Starved Japanese airfields, he knew. Eventually, he was brought into a small briefing room where Commander Dixon, Captain Giles, and a Japanese-speaking officer waited. The atmosphere was quiet, respectful, almost unreal. Ensign Koga, the translator, began gently, "We have questions, not about Japanese secrets, only about your condition and the events of the morning." Koga didn't meet their eyes. His voice was low, strained. "I have failed. Capture brings shame." The translator relayed the words. Dixon exhaled softly. "Son," he said, "you chose to live. That isn't shame. That's survival." Koga looked up, startled by the tone. No mockery, no anger, just humanity. Captain Giles leaned forward. "You'll be treated fairly, fed, protected, and when the war ends, you go home." Home? The word twisted like a blade. Would Japan even accept him back? Or would they erase his name? He gave no answer. The questioning was brief. No threats, no demands, just simple, almost mundane inquiries. When it was over, he was escorted back to his compartment, unbound, unheard, and more confused than ever. On the flight deck the next. Morning, chaos of a different kind unfolded. Engineers swarmed to zero. Addison wiped his hands on a rag. "All right, boys, today we find out what makes this thing dance." Panels came off. Photos were taken. Measurements logged. Every rivet, every cable, every inch of Japanese. Engineering was examined with feverish enthusiasm. One crewman tapped the wing. "Feels like paper." Another whistled at the carburetor. "That's why they climb so damn fast." Addison grinned. "We're going to crack this thing open like a Christmas present." The Zero wasn't just an airplane anymore. It was intelligence. Gold. A lieutenant leaned toward Commander Dixon. "Sir, this changes everything." Dixon nodded. It already had. Below deck, Koga felt the vibrations of footsteps above him and knew without question that every tap, every clang, every metallic echo was the sound of his aircraft being pulled apart, piece by piece, bolt by bolt, secret by secret. Duty told him to feel shame, but the beating inside his chest whispered a different truth. At least he was still alive. The morning sun rose bright and sharp over Philippine Sea, glittering off the carrier's deck as if nothing extraordinary had happened the day before. But every man aboard Bogue knew better. The captured Zero had become the star of the ship. Everyone wanted a glimpse, a photograph, a whisper of what the engineering teams were discovering. Ensign Koga sat alone in his compartment, listening to the phantom above him. He imagined the Zero stripped bare, its panels resting like shed armor on the deck. He could almost hear the engineers discussing it, its light frame, its powerful climb, its vulnerabilities. He pressed his palm against the cold metal bulkhead. It felt like touching a tombstone. The door opened again. This time only one man entered, the Japanese-speaking officer who had translated for the captain. "Ensign Koga," he said politely. "May I sit?" Koga nodded. The man sat beside him on the bunk. "I know this must feel confusing," he began. "You were taught that we are cruel, that surrender is worse than death." Koga looked down. The officer was speaking truth. He didn't want to hear. "But yesterday," the man continued, "you saw something different." Koga swallowed. I do not understand. Your kindness. It isn't kindness, the officer replied. Softly, it's humanity. War or not, you are a pilot, a man, and men deserve dignity. Koga's eyes stung unexpectedly. He blinked hard. The translator rested his hands on his knees. I will not try to change your beliefs, but understand this. You are not dishonored. You are alive, and one day you will return home. Koga hesitated. His voice came out, quiet, cracked. What if home no longer wants me? The officer looked at him with an expression Koga had not seen from an enemy. Sympathy, then you build a new one. Meanwhile, on the flight deck, Commander Dixon and Addison watched as the Zero was carefully lowered into the hangar bay for transport. Once back at port, it would be shipped to the United States for full testing. Long before their pilots ever flew against another Zero, they would know every weakness, every blind spot, every limit. Addison exhaled. Sir, the single airplane may save hundreds of lives. Dixon nodded slowly, and it came from the courage of a kid who tried to survive. He looked toward the horizon at the endless blue. War had a way of twisting fate in ways no one could predict. That afternoon, Koga was moved to more comfortable quarters reserved for long-term PS. His new cell was larger, with a real bed, a small desk, even a slit of a window that let in warm sea light. On the table lay a tray of food. Americans always fed their prisoners. Well, something else he had not expected. He sat slowly, staring at the meal. Rice, chicken, bread, water. He ate quietly, mechanically at first. Then, with hunger, he could no longer hide. With each bite, he felt the knot inside him loosen just slightly. He was alive. He was safe, and somehow, despite everything, his captives treated him not as a disgrace, but as a human being. He set down his fork and stared at the photograph taped to the opposite wall. A picture of the captured Zero taken on deck before they lowered it away. His aircraft was gone. His mission was over. His fate now belonged to history. But Tadayoshi Koga, just a young man in a war too vast to understand, was still breathing. And that single stubborn breath had changed the Pacific War more than he would ever